this culture is developed.
Do you think Western culture is developed?
Well, what I mean is, okay, I mean, I'm absolutely amazed at the number of young people who cannot read.
In these schools that literally are churning out, you know, fours and fours and fours and fours, but the kids can hardly have not slept. They don't know anything that they can do. There is a complete disconnect between education and work. Yeah. Because we reduced work to jobs. There are no jobs. This education does not produce people to do work. Our formal education needs to be treated for what it deserves, not much. Currently, not much. Go through the motions and go through it quickly. But seriously, can we find ways in which formal education today responds to the challenges of work?
If it doesn't come bursting out of you, in spite of everything, don't do it. Unless it comes unmasked out of your heart and your mind and your mouth and your gut, don't do it. If you have to sit for hours staring at your computer screen or hunched over your typewriter, searching for words, don't do it. If you are doing it for money or fame, don't do it. If you are doing it because you want women in your bed, don't do it. If you have to sit there and rewrite it again and again, don't do it. If it's hard work just thinking about it, don't do it. If you're trying to write like somebody else, forget about it. If you have to wait for it to roar out of you, then wait patiently. If it never does roar out of you, do something else. If you have to read it to your wife or your girlfriend or your boyfriend or your parents or to anybody at all, you are not ready. Do not be like so many writers. Don't be like so many thousands of people who call themselves writers. Don't be dull and boring and pretentious. Don't be consumed with self-love. The libraries of the world have yawned themselves to sleep over your kind. Don't add to that. Don't do it. Unless it comes out of your soul like a rocket, unless being still would drive you to madness or suicide or murder, don't do it. Unless the sun inside you is burning your gut, don't do it. When it is truly time, and if you have been chosen, it will do it by itself, and it will keep on doing it until you die or it dies inside you. There is no other way, and there never was. Welcome back to yet another episode of the Two Sages Conversation. And today's conversation is going to start with two quotes because it's our second episode and we have two sages. So today's quote goes, it's an excerpt from the book Greed by Angela Duckworth, but the quote is by Teddy Roosevelt. It goes, "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasm, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat." And the second quote for today's conversation is by one of the most celebrated Africans, Nelson Mandela. It's on his take on education and work. It goes, "Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. But beyond formal learning, there is education of life itself. The lessons taught by hardship, perseverance, and service. Work is not merely a means to earning a living. It's a way to give purpose to your existence, to uplift others, to participate in the long journey of human dignity. What counts in life is not the mere fact that we have lived. It is what difference we have made to the lives of those that will determine the significance of the life we lead. In learning, in working, we become. Those are many words, but the topic that we are having today is also equally broad. So with those many words, I want to break the ice by you sharing with us what has transpired in your lives over the last couple of days. Any highlights?
No, Zac, you've been doing significant things. I've just been a farmer.
First, I think the characterization that we are sages, if you don't mind, I just feel, okay, please wait. I'm not yet 80. I might look 80, but I'm not yet 80, so.
It's not counted in years.
You have to be 80 to this age.
That in my mind,
It's not counted in
the idea
years.
of a sage, you know, you've lived so long, you actually know a lot about life. But I haven't
It's the
that
letter.
long.
I think it's the letter.
Sage.
I think it's the letter, Zac. It's not about how long you've lived. I think it's about how much you know about life.
Oh,
Yeah.
I think the two go together. Of course, it's possible to live so long and not know much about life.
There's a saying, I think my mother used to quote it to me. She said, the old fool is the worst fool.
There is another saying that it has been said that wisdom comes with age, but sometimes age comes alone. So anyway,
But by the way, we do give a lot of honour to old people in Africa. And much more so than if you come. You know that there's cultures where youth is celebrated. And then there's cultures where age is celebrated. Yeah. And Africa traditionally, if you have that's why he's got the white beard.
I think that's actually what among African traditional societies, there is a distinction made between being an elder and being old.
Is there?
Yes.
I don't know.
Yeah, so elders, yes, are generally older people, you know, but not every older person is an elder.
Is an elder. I totally agree, right. But sometimes I think that every old person is
every old person is expected to be an elder. Yeah. But unfortunately, life is such that not every old person is an elder.
My perspective on when you're talking about age and sages and ages and stuff like that is, and I go on about this all the time, that all our lives are on various seasons, and I don't just mean, the season of spring, summer, autumn, and winter. I mean kind of like there are different periods of your life which represent different things. And obviously, when you get older, you should have a lot of institutional knowledge. You should have imbibed a lot of stuff that you can actually bring some wisdom to the situation. What is it they say when an elder dies, you burn down a library? Yeah. So I do think that there is a season. I'll not say I've been a sage, but there is a season when you have been there and done that. You've been a CEO, now you're a chairman. You've been a bishop, now you're a mentor and a teacher and a writer. So I think if you recognize the seasons that we build on, it should build to something where there's.
I think the key word was should.
It should. It's never.
The key word is should. And I agree wholeheartedly, and we are absolutely on the right page. I think that I also often say that life is given to us in seasons. Yeah. We experience life in seasons. Yeah. And so I.
And we must enjoy each season appropriately in that sense.
Totally. Yeah. And the people who thrive in life are those who make the most in the seasons of life. Yeah. They are able to discern the season and do what they ought within that season. Yeah. And it's possible. I mean, we lose seasons. When it's season for planting, you're busy doing all sorts of other things. So you will not harvest if you didn't plant. So totally, I am with you.
I mean, it seems logical, we all know the seasons of life, but at the same time, sometimes, and I think I found it more in developed cultures rather than so much in Africa. But you find it in Africa as well.
Did you just say developed cultures?
Uh-huh.
Did you just
Western
say
cultures?
no, you said developed cultures and not African?
Not so much.
Really?
Do you think this culture is developed?
Do you think Western culture is developed?
Well, what I mean is, okay, let me put it this way.
Different cultures.
Different cultures,
Yeah.
but let me put it this way.
Western, no. Okay, go ahead.
Western, but the reason I said developed was because in this culture, everything is always changing. Always. You know, there's never, things don't stand still. But you could go to, if I went back to Ireland, I could find, it has changed as well, but it's not moving as fast as we are here.
Actually, I think, I don't know, but I don't know if you think about your time in Luwero and your time in Kampala, the two are different places. They are the same Uganda, but they are different places. So I live in Tinda, and it is true. The pace at which things are changing, the pace at which behaviors are changing. But I actually go to...
I'm not saying one's good or bad.
No, and I'm also not saying...
One is
either
more
good.
static.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And no, I go back to Chiburara, my home village, and it's totally amazing. Christmas, New Year, or whatever the seasons. So I think, the environment, the space where you are. But yes, I agree. This is a season in our lives.
Yeah,
you and me, when we should should be.
I want to make the point. What I want to make the point is
Please
that
do.
sometimes people allow all the seasons to come along to them. So, say, David, you're a medical doctor. They go through medical school, then they do their internship, then they do their higher education, and then they practice as surgery, and then they retire. And it's almost like it's mapped out and it happens. They didn't make any real decisions about that. So it's a continuum. Okay? And I feel life is much more now that you actually need to wake up, after doing something for a certain period of time and question yourself and say, is this purposeful for me? Is this something I'm just going to let it happen to me, or I need to get out of the mold, get out of my comfort zone and do something different? And that's, I would still be a doctor in Ireland or England. Most of my classmates, 80% of my classmates, stayed around home, stayed doing, what was expected. Their life was mapped out from medical student to,
Doctor, and then now they're consultant.
consultant and retirement and, sailing a boat or playing golf or whatever. Nothing wrong with that life, but I question. I say I think if you recognise that your life doesn't have to be a continuum, then sometimes you have to sit up and say to yourself, you had your, you could have stayed on as a bishop.
Yeah.
You decided.
I'm listening to you, Ian, and you know how I really like to disagree with you. No, but totally everything you've said. That's my view about life. I think that every season is an opportunity to question, to ask whether who you are, where you are, is making the best of who you are and where you are. What you're becoming.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
I completely am with you.
Yeah.
Just to maybe for the younger generation, it is true. In the school system here, Ian, when we grew up, and you did physics, math, and chemistry.
Yeah.
It was kind of obvious.
You could
Physics, math, and chemistry, you did engineering.
Yeah.
If you're a top student, you did engineering. If you did physics, chemistry, biology, and you're a good student, you did medicine.
Yes.
If you didn't do as well, again, it's this, we're coming back into it. So, but when I was finishing my A-levels, I just stopped and I thought, can I make an engineer? And it actually became clear to me, I don't enjoy machines. I'm not a machine. I don't thrive on machines. Even to this day, I'm one of the latest people in adopting a new technology or whatever. But I actually am not afraid of engaging with people who are totally different. So I realized early, I'm a people person, and my life thrives with people. People and ideas. People and ideas. are not manipulating machines. So I really completely agree with you, and I would actually love us to come back to this, because I'm afraid there is a way, and every generation seems to have a way in which education, the mode of it, forces people into jackets. And I really think that jacketing of our lives is one of the problems why economies and people like ours do not thrive. So I am completely, totally with you. That hence season is not just you're moving from secondary school to no, that's not what it is.
It does very much tie into the education system, because the education system we have in Uganda is kind of still based on an old-fashioned model, and yet now we have the gig economy, and we have people who cannot actually, there's no job security in feeling that I can train for this thing. I'll go through my season of being a student, then I'll train as an engineer, and then I'll have a job for life as an engineer, because at the minute things are moving so fast and changing so fast that it is more relevant than ever that we need to be lifelong learners, because the whole idea that you can grow up and do your schooling, then you can do your higher education, then you get a job, and then you can work on a continuum, and then you can retire. Honestly, there's fewer and fewer people in today's economy who can actually do that. Yeah. And I'm not even sure it's a great thing anyway, as I said, because I think, as you said, you need to question our seasons. But I think that's where coming into the education and work, because the education is the thing that gives you the opportunity to then set and reset and question. Now, David, you, in fact, you're on the among the cream, the students who got, can do medicine or law. Those are the big subjects in Uganda. And when you were doing medicine, then you read a few books and you looked and said, am I just going to go along with this tide, or do I have other things that I would like to bring into this equation? And you're still very young. I mean, you qualified in medicine, 2 years or something? Yeah. But tell us about you in terms of
I had asked you guys to tell us something interesting. There are young people listening. So something interesting from your week before we.
All right.
You see why I'm saying your sentences.
Okay.
You have a lot.
Okay.
But before I go there,
yes.
one thing, 1 minute, just something.
I spent 3 days in Addis Ababa this week. It was life-changing. It was challenging at every level. Talking about change, Addis is a completely different city from what it was 10 years ago. Completely different. I used to describe Addis as, you could say that about Addis of 20 years ago, 15 years ago. It's a huge slum. Absolutely not. It's, skyscrapers, paved walks, and it's a construction site. So that was. And then I inquired, and it's amazing how construction projects are about a certain way of thinking, identity, and the world. So we got into conversations with ordinary people who lived in Addis of 15 years ago and 10 years ago, and I can tell you, my friends said, we are lost in Addis. We don't know where we live. This is not the same Addis. And he's a friend. I've been visiting Addis since 1990, and I've seen some of the changes. So she said to me, let's pass by where her office used to be. And of course it's not there.
Wow.
And she couldn't even tell the road to that office because the road is not there.
Wow.
The buildings are not there because they are erasing. So that was a huge phenomenon.
Okay.
I was speaking at a large conference, 3,000 Christian church leaders, pastors. And for me, from all over Ethiopia, which was a first, absolutely. But to delve into the history of Ethiopia so the one thing that, and I could say many, but just one thing, while we constantly have said that Ethiopia is unlike several African countries because it never went through a colonization. Actually, that's not true. It simply is what kind of colonization? Because while the sub-Saharan Africa modern period, 17th, 18th, 19th centuries, was colonized by Europeans, actually the Horn, and not in the recent colonization period, but the internal, the colonization, the empire, it has an ancient empire that dates. But that empire was just like all other empires, whether it's the British Empire, the Roman Empire, it's just like every other empire. And I had some time to read about Emperor Menelik and his projects and his strategy for control. Amazing. I mean, that totally fascinated me. And of course, Ian, I know you're not surprised that I was inquiring the role of Christianity, the role of religion, and discovering it's exactly the same as every empire. The conversation we had last time, every empire has its religion.
Well, I mean, Ethiopia is one of the ancient religions, really.
Absolutely. Ancient, you know, I asked them, how old is Christianity here? From 1st century.
Exactly.
They date from the 1st century. But I say to them, so how come that missionaries to the continent of Africa came from Europe and not Ethiopia?
That's an interesting question. Yeah.
I know, and it was very clear. It was a religion of empire. There is a religion that can only survive. Religions of empires literally only survive for as long as that empire reigns. And there is a challenge. I mean, the struggle. So I was fascinated by the context. Of course, you can't not visit Ethiopia and enjoy their amazing cuisine, just awesome. Their coffee and the beauty of their culture. I honestly hope that's something that doesn't
Zac,
change.
I have one question for you. Did you drink their wine that's like orange juice?
I drank their local wine,
It's very interesting wine.
but I didn't drink the one that I don't
And
know.
did you dance with your neck?
Does it require to have you drunk some plenty?
Yeah,
I don't know what you're asking for. Because I'm afraid you're asking how much of it I drank. So if I said I danced with my neck,
No, but you know, they dance with their neck. Like, it's
no, I'm not sure.
They dance with the Ethiopians with
I can't
all this
trust,
stuff
I
with their
can't trust
neck.
your question.
Okay. So, Ian, what was the
so
highlight of your week?
My highlight of the week was I went to my farm. It's always a highlight every time I go to my farm, and it had been raining because we have had a dry spell, and it was beautiful. The advantage of my farm is the sun hills. So you've been there, so you know you just go and then
It's amazing.
it's just like
Yeah,
you know.
beautiful.
It's beautiful. So I did that, and the other thing I did was I did speak to a group of leaders in the medical field. They were all running regional referral hospitals and stuff up in Nyumbe and Rua and up there. They wanted me to go up. I'm like, oh my goodness, this is 8 hours drive up here. So I did it virtually.
That's great.
And it was, I think it was useful. And that's what I mean about the seasons we're in, because they were looking to me to talk to them about leadership in the healthcare sector. And one of the things I said to them was, I can't take what I've been doing in the private sector and, you know, your experience is going to be very different. But so I gave them general principles of leadership. One of them was, leadership is not, it's about leading the team. You know, really, there's no way you can be an exceptional leader in the corporate world or unless you have a good team. And the first thing they said was, well, we don't get, I said, you need to identify your team. They said, we don't get an opportunity. We're just, those are the people we're given by the ministry, you know, which is it. Big disadvantage. But at the same time, I still came back and said, but, you know, it's going to be your vision and your passion that will be the thing that will motivate them, because, you know, they're, people will gather around where there's a visionary, you know, and so if you have a vision to eradicate malaria, or you have a vision to really do something about HIV and you're passionate about it. So it was those common principles.
Yes, true. In the corporate sector, your own business, you find your team, you create your own team, you build it. But actually, even in public service, I would argue, no excuse. Once you find a team, it's your job as a leader to form them into a team. So rather, once you find a people, because they are a people, it's your job to form them into a team. And your success or your failure will actually depend to the extent to which you've formed these people into a team. So I totally agree.
I remember once Zac and I had, I think it was you, because I sometimes I look at people and I say, but that person is talented, that person is, they're a good professional and so on. And I think you said to me, but the problem is they lack passion. And if you don't have passion for, you can be a good professional, you can be all of those things, but it's passion that will drive you, and then other people can catch your vision.
I know you shoot me. You know what I call it?
Well,
you must believe something. You must believe it. Passion is about what do you believe. But I completely agree with you. And there are people who, in any job, any place you are, so the other word I would really use, depth of conviction. Do you have a depth of conviction about where you are and what you do? And what is that? Can you name it? Because it's also not enough that you... Because some people think that passion is energy. People confuse charisma for passion.
Yeah, it's different. Yeah, it's different.
And the two are not the same. It's really depth of conviction about what this is about, where it leads. You, in a sense, are answering the question, why? Why does this matter? Why is it important? Not just to me, but to other people where we are.
Yeah. If you can transmit your vision to other people. So if I've got passion to do something and I can transmit that vision, then that's what will motivate my team. Absolutely. And that's what will bring them together, and then we'll be able to do something together. Yeah.
All right, that sounds great. You guys had interesting weeks. So I want us to get into today's conversation. We've already hinted on it. The first quote was from Roosevelt, and the part I like about it is how much value he puts into the work, the sweat, the perseverance. And Mandela tells us that education is a key to unlock worlds, and he mentions that education is not just about learning, it's about identifying, making yourself valuable so that you can do great work, and that work is not just about living, it is actually helps us become. So they are beyond just what we learn or what we do. So I want us to start our conversation around education. Cool. I'll just share the highlight of my week to lead into that. We released, I was just watching the docu-series that I made, and the last episode was on teams. And as part of my university curriculum, I added a component of learning how to run teams, learning how to build and run teams. And so I was just writing it down. I realized I've put together close to 100 people across the continent on the different teams that I've been on. And it was intentional for me because after reading Yuval Noah's work in 2018, and he says what makes human beings exceptional is not intelligence or emotions, but our ability to work together in complex ways. I was like, this is the best thing for me to learn right now, how to get people to work. And it has served me very well. So now I want to bring it back to you guys in terms of education. I will just put my view, then we shall go from there. My view is that education is literally your whole life, right from when you start. You're learning from people, you're learning how to walk, and when you're young and unconscious, maybe you are literally pushing yourself to get, and then at a certain point you get into the formal, informal one where you're learning from your parents and the people you see around. You are getting mentors, maybe that's, I want to become like that person. You're learning words, you're learning things, then you go to school, and then you get through the system. And there are faults to that. I think there is a hard way, it's very hard to escape that, but I think people can make a parallel education while doing that. And I'm hoping that this discussion can help people who may not be able to jump out of the education system right now. They're already in it. They're probably in their secondary or they already have a degree, but there is a way out of that even when that formal education system hasn't changed. So I will open it up to get you guys' views on what education is, what it's not, the faults, and how young people can get out of the tragedy.
Well, I mean, both of us are involved in education in many ways, but one of the things that I've seen, and I think it's really sad, is when people are deprived of education when they're young, they become dull. There's a relationship between the stimulation of the mind and the plasticity of the brain when you're young, and those formative years, the early learning years, are very important, right through your youth, right until I don't think your brain becomes sort of loses its plasticity until you're maybe in your 30s or something. I'm not a neurophysicist, but what you see is the evidence of when you see adults who never had an opportunity to be stimulated, then you find certain traits there, that they develop. For example, if you take people who've been subject to a lot of war, they weren't educated, what they knew is war, violence and so on, they will have a certain way of thinking. Every problem will be solved by more violence or by confrontation. And I find it, we were mentioning the farm, but I find it like heartbreaking to see these young little kids who are not really being adequately educated, and then I feel like their whole life has been taken away from them because that opportunity, you just don't know how. There could be an Einstein there could be a Nelson Mandela there, but they're never going to be able to manifest that because this has been taken away from them by the very fact that they're not being stimulated. And even even the education system within Uganda itself is to me is not up to the purpose it should be. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is that the lifelong learning, somehow there is still an attitude, may I say it's within Africa, I don't know, Zac, maybe it's worldwide, but there's often an attitude that you go through your period of education, but then the idea of lifelong learning and of learning new things and new skills and so on as you get older, people don't do it. I mean, I'm absolutely amazed at the number of young people who cannot read. They can scroll their phone, but they can't sit down and read a book. And they certainly can't sit down and read a heavy book. But many young people today can't even read a novel. And I think this is a loss. I don't know. I mean, we're going to see what happens to the Generation Z, the scrollers, but it's also the Millennials as well. And I get so much education out of getting a book and reading it. I like to read books with pages. My wife likes to read books on Kindle, but I like audible books as well. And I honestly, among young people, David, yourself, I know you read, but if you were to do a survey among 100 young people and find out how many books they read per year or per month or whatever, I think, so we're missing out on something there. There's something bad going on. Mm-hmm.
I shake my head. Various levels. First, where we are at, you reference Uganda, African. I think of my father and myself. Mm-hmm. My father's education and my education, and what it is my father, how my father saw education and how I see it. So my father's generation were the first generation of Ugandans. Mm-hmm. That's a generation born in the first half, in the first 20 years of the 20th century. Mm-hmm. So you have colonial conquest is pretty much completed for Uganda with the 1990 agreement. It sets it up for Buganda. The rest is more up. It's imposing what has happened in
You
Buganda.
mean 1890?
No, actually 1900.
1900.
1900. So, but 1894 is the protectorate,
Yeah.
similar time in terms of Kenya. The thing is this, that our formal education, and unfortunately, the trumping of education for life. So in the African traditional culture, there's a very, very clear system of education for life through the different seasons of life. And life was measured by certain milestones but the Western education absolutely imposed because it's imposing a particular way of seeing the world. It's imposing because education socializes, education imparts a worldview, education shapes mindsets, education to some degree wires you socially. It's a wiring process. So my father's generation, therefore, being the people who were completely and totally disrupted. The disruption was so severe that some had to make a choice between partying with their traditional societies and not, or so it's and then people like my father chose to align, and to align meant to go in the formal schools. To align meant to be buying into the religion that promoted that education. And please remember, Christianity does not promote education for life. No. Christianity is promoting education for proselytization, for propaganda, for evangelist propaganda. The same thing with healthcare. So there is this massive disruption. And I think one of the thoughts I bring to your generation, David, is that my kind of fear is the lack of interest in history. To take things as they are, rather than ask, how did we get here? And that's, I think, what I would like to say. So, and I regret, personally, that I'm only coming to that point of asking, how did we get where we are? So we have a crisis for those of us, of my family, I mean my generation, because we are the very first people to be completely uprooted from our villages. So you ask anybody my age, and you ask them, where is your home? None of my age will say, Kampala is my home.
No.
They all mention the village.
Yeah.
I ask my children the same question. They don't give the same question.
Same answer?
No, they don't. So they don't give the same answer. They simply say Tinda.
Yeah.
They are very urban.
Yeah.
So we are the first generation to be totally and completely disrupted. And so in many ways we are actually lost. So we buy wholesale formal education as though formal education is education for life. And Ian, that's why we are where we are. We are now in a crisis because formal education has not yielded the promise. You have hundreds of thousands of kids finishing formal education.
No jobs.
And there are no jobs because it's not. But truth be told, and I don't think we realize this, and this is my tragedy with curriculum developers in this country, is I don't think they ask the real philosophical questions that we are discussing. So what? For what? What kind of life do you imagine? So I think we're in a place where we are lost. We have a formal education that was never intended. By the way, it was never intended to be an education for all our lives. It was intended to be able to educate you for a certain kind of life that was imposed upon us. Now, it presumed an economy. If you remember, the people educated of my father's generation were all educated as assistants. So there was no college education up to 1950. I mean, it's very recent, higher education. Technical training is a factor of the 1940s, 50s, just skills training. Most education in the earlier period was simply literacy and numeracy. And literacy was primarily, and this, I'm a follower of Jesus, I've said, but it really hurts me that people are being taught to read and write in order to read only the Bible. in order to read these prayer books and so on. So, history matters. How did we get here? And truth be told, this education that was imposed upon us, given to us, that we've imbibed, never was it ever intended to be an education for life. In fact, it was intended to be an education for the disruption of a particular kind of life. And I think we've got to ask the question, what does an education for life look like? And that's where the two quotes I think you bring are critical. So, our education today trains critics, trains armchair, analysts.
People like us.
No, you and I are not. We are in the trenches. We read any book that is absolutely, I think it's important that we ask ourselves, this education for what?
Yeah.
This education, back to the quote from Roosevelt, is education that produces armchair analysts, commentators, and so on and so forth. And I even think about it even trains, it even socializes people into creating a legacy.
Zac, one of the things that I actually, and we're talking about this education as in the Ugandan education, yeah? And you're talking about your generation and people below you who've gone through that system. One of the things that has struck me when I have met senior civil servants and not your father's generation, but
my generation,
your generation and younger, is the actual belief, a tremendous strong belief in the state. That the way ahead is to be a civil servant, is to rise to the level of commissioner, PS, and so on and so forth. And there's a very strong belief in that. And that is, I think, comes from the old colonial
absolutely. That's what it was.
Education for civil
That's
service.
That's what it is.
And it's still there.
No, it's
and actually it feeds into politics as well, because it's actually the president who appoints all of these people, so they all have to toe the line in terms of.
And it's worse even for Uganda and others. And by the way, now over the last since 1970, with the Bretton Woods organizations, IMF, World Bank, enforcing a certain economy,
structural adjustments, all that stuff. Yeah.
But did you see it had certain enforcements about education?
Yeah.
So then you now have universal primary education. I mean, I would want to check, is it universal in the sense that it prepares these kids for life? Is it universal in the sense that it's preparing? But just what you said, you at the university, I mean, I have the opportunity of hiring young people. They don't have life skills. They can't seem to know what they can do with their lives. But it's not their fault. It's an education that was never intended to work for them. And I think that, and I don't know what my good friend, the good general, Amanya Musheka's commission, I don't know what he's recommending. But I think you have an opportunity, David, for you, this generation, to demand that report in Uganda and say, what does it say? What does it imagine about the future? Formal education as it is has killed, in my view, Africans. It has killed us. And I think we need to go back to, what does education for life therefore look like? Yes, it will must be integrated into a formal education. So for example, Ian, I'm grateful that in primary schools, there is now, I think within the curriculum, forcing the learning of mother tongue. I think that's actually very good. Because with mother tongue comes learning culture, learning ways of living, food, and so on and so forth. I think as levels emerge, but I think the point that you make, there is a stage in life when the brain is ready, is wired for stimulation. We shouldn't be able to miss that. So I think with modern science, with the understanding of how the brain works, the central nervous system, we are now better placed to actually develop a curriculum for lifelong learning in which formal education is only a small part. That would be my view. Formal education is only a small part of lifelong learning. So work So in every job, there must be integrated processes of learning. And even now, much so, with the fast changing pace of formal processes.
So I want to take you back to something that you mentioned. You say people are getting out of school and there are no jobs. And that brought the question of, is that the purpose of education? So I just want us to discuss about the purpose of education, because I think when the why you mentioned is answered, then the how can be adjusted in so many ways. Like Ian mentioned, people of those days were going through school to become civil servants, and that was the why. So the how just happened that way. So you mentioned education for life. I want us to go a little bit deeper there into the why, because now this is the reason for education.
I still feel like the early learning side of things are, right through your days when you're young, the more stimulation that you get, the more that you're challenged in terms of your the stuff that you learn, the more that's putting in a basic framework for you. That's hopefully giving you the tools by which you will then continue your education as life goes on. And that's why I'm saying the people who completely just didn't get an education, you really are limiting their lives.
If I may interrupt, Ian, or is it that the environments in which they are growing, you mentioned conflict and war, is itself an educational process, but unfortunately it socializes you into a way of thinking the world.
Exactly.
So that socialization is horrible. That's why wars and conflicts are horrible, because they socialize. So the other word I use is education as a socialization process. So I think you are spot on. These environments of conflict and war, they kill the future.
No, I mean, unless you have security, you can get hardly anything done. I remember going up to, it wasn't Packwatch, it was Lyra side, and going to one of those villages where Coney had done a lot of killing. And I went there just sort of toward when the army was getting on top of things, and there was this whole group of children sitting under a tree. There was 100 of them, toddlers. And the amazing thing is they were just sitting there. They weren't playing around, they weren't making a noise, they weren't, they were becalmed. And I'm sure it was because of the whole, the whole conflict, the whole situation they're in. And so many people, that's been there. So the war is the worst thing, because it just kills everything. But I think the point I'm trying to make as well is that whether your education was set up by the colonialists or whether it's old-fashioned or whatever it is, there are certain basics that if you learn them when you're young, they will stand, you'll be able to build on those for life. For example, I have problems with language, as in, I don't speak Uganda and that sort of thing. When I tried to learn that when I was older, it just wouldn't stick. And yet I don't have any problems with a lot of other skills. As I say, I can read widely and on business and accounting, and a lot of other more complex skills seem to be developed quite well as far as my brain's concerned. And your brain, your brain will develop pathways, neural pathways. And if there's a bit of your brain that's not used, once you get to a certain age, forget it. It's like a potato. It's not going to absorb an awful lot of stuff at that time. So I think there's this opportunity, as I say, early learning, and when you're a young person, that the more you can absorb, the more you can take the opportunities, the more you can be challenged, and in every single way, not just sitting in a classroom. Then that's going to form a basis on which you can then build and build and build. And I think that's that's incredibly important.
I think the question why, which is the conversation, as societies, I don't know that we have grappled with how we have a consensus on answering that question why, which then becomes structured into systems and processes of learning, in which formal education is only one of them. I think of, for example, what happens if you have a typical kid in this Kampala, whose parents work in some corporate, private organization or even government, here is the tragedy of our system. They get out of home, depending on how far they are from their particular school, at latest 6:30.
And drop the child off.
So that means that the kids walk up. So kids are not even having decent sleep. And I was talking to one parent the other day. They take the kids to school, or they are picked rather, 7 a.m. and they get back home at 6. What ages? Their youngest is 5 years, or is it 4 years, in pre-primary, stays there, sleeps at school, comes back home. When they get back home, I'm going back to your point about how are we stimulating our youngest brains. What we are really doing is killing them. They get back home, they are exhausted. I don't even know why these kids would ever want to do anything, but I think we're just doing the routine, we are just in this, and international schools are now the in thing. If you don't take your kids to international school when you're working in some corporate organization. So that is answering a particular why that I don't even know that the parents ever stop to say, why am I doing this for my kids? Why? I have met a number of people, your generation, David, who have said to me, my parents wanted me to get this degree. I became a doctor. When they got the degree as doctors, they went and gave it to their parents. Now I have freedom to go and learn something of my own. I have a friend of mine who's a lawyer, finished it, and she said, my father always wanted me to be a lawyer. I wanted to be in communications, but my father said, you can't be such a bright kid and just do communications or do, And she said, as soon as I finished it, I gave it to my father. I don't want to have anything to do with it. And so the question you raise about jobs and work, I think the distinction we must make is between jobs and work. Work is that which adds productivity, value to the individual, the worker, to society. Work. Do jobs add value to society? Not always the time. Jobs are stipulated in institutions, and as Ian was saying, for the longest time, the biggest job manufacturer was the state. So it was in teachers, civil service, and other civil service, the military. Do you know we have a situation right now? I mean, I was listening to the president, and he was talking about people who become soldiers because they needed a job, and then soldiers who do it for a passion. And he actually said, soldiers who become soldiers for a job are dangerous soldiers, and it is the best soldiers those who do it for a passion. I was about to say, I wish I could say to him, sir, because the education system is not, there is a complete disconnect between education and work. Because we reduced work to jobs. There are no jobs. This education does not produce people to do work. I mean, as simple as any work. So the tragedy is this. You have an education system preparing people for certain kinds of jobs. The jobs are not there. So of course many people are becoming policemen, many people are becoming soldiers, because that's the job that's available. So I think we need to be able to talk about an education for work, because that is life.
So when you mention security forces and stuff, it always strikes me about, and you mentioned the difference between jobs and work. We provide jobs because there's a huge unemployment in Uganda, but we provide jobs in security companies for a lot of people, quite a section of the population. That security guard, their job is to open and close the gate. That's basically what a guard does. So you talk about a job that is stimulating, a job where you're developing yourself. It's kind of like and what really amuses me sometimes is some of those guards will try to, they'll take the opportunity, like the guard we have here, he's quite good, he'll come switch on the generator, he'll check around, they're varying degrees, but you will actually get some guards who come here sometimes, and maybe temporary guards, and the one thing that they're supposed to know, which is opening the gate, they don't know how. You know, they honestly they can't open the gate, and you're thinking, and you know, it's what is the biblical saying for he has. More shall he receive, and him who has not, even that which he has will be taken away from him. Now that is very true of jobs and education, because unfortunately many of those jobs are very, very, very unstimulating, and the guy is just literally sitting there or standing there, and his mind,
So Ian, you know we have this disaster of Boda Boda riders, and
same
they
thing.
all
It's the same thing.
Today they are numbered as part of the employment sector of this country.
Well, it's a job, but
I know it's a job, but you are sitting there waiting for some, and you see them how they. So the point you make, it's not stimulating. What value are you adding to yourself other than a little bit more money?
In actual fact, once a guy goes into that Boda Boda industry, he's pretty much lost for doing anything else, because he's. The way that whole thing, it's a completely dead end job, and he'll end up as a certain type of person. Most of those Buddha writers. But what I'm saying is, now I want to take the other side of it, because that's all very depressing what we're talking about. And the other thing is work, as you know, the privilege of working. I get up here. I mean, our house looks over the lake and so on, and when I go out in the mornings. And the sun is rising, and I think it is such a wonderful thing to be able to have work to do, and I make my own work. You know, nobody is my boss really. I'm my own boss in that sense. But I want to work. People say to me, "Are you, have you retired? Or are you going to retire?" And I say, there's no chance of that. And then my son says to me, the problem with that is that he doesn't distinguish between work and pleasure. You know, and so when he starts, if you give him time, he'll start some other business. Because I think, you know what, Mandela, or it was Mandela, I think, work is something that, yes, there's mundane to it. There's mundane stuff to working. No job is always tremendously stimulating and so on. But work should be a privilege, that you are able to do several things in work. You're able to develop yourself. You're able to learn more skills and have self-development. A lot of Ugandans don't see that. You're able to, and I'll come back to that in a minute, you're able to develop the organisation you work for, and you're able to get money that will keep you going. And those three things are tremendously important in work. And there's a young man who works down in one of my companies, and he has I think he has some kind of a degree in IT or something like that, or a higher qualification. And he failed to get a job, and he's working as a gardener. And I'm sort of, and he's a good Christian, and he goes to church. And I think where he gets more of his stimulation is from the church than from the world. But I said to him, but okay, this is where you've landed, but what are you doing to use the opportunity to improve yourself and your circumstances? So he's got brains, so he could become a supervisor, there's always those opportunities, but his attitude is that this is something I have to do for now. It's just, where I've landed, but I'm marking time, and I'm waiting for God to give me the opportunity in something that really suits me. Now, I believe that attitude is actually, many Ugandans have that attitude. And I think that is very self-destructive, actually.
Yeah, and I just want to comment here, the comment you make about this younger person who, as far the comment you make, that it looks to you, looking at him, that he finds more stimulation in church than at work. And Ian, I also want to say that's one of the challenges of our highly moralized religious societies we are. Ways in which the mind and creativity is actually being killed, I dare say, by churches, by the notion of have faith, God will do it for you. If only you pray, just wait on God. All that language is actually very destructive. And yet, I can see this because my other expertise is the study of the scriptures. There's nothing in the scriptures that demeans work.
Yeah.
On the contrary, everything in the scriptures of the Bible encourages work. And there is work is a moment of worship.
Yeah.
This idea that worship is what happens in church is just not right.
Yeah.
Work is pleasure.
Yeah.
This separation between work and pleasure.
Yeah.
Work is pleasurable. Yes, of course there are. It is the hard work. But part of the hard work is the hard training, it's the discipline.
It's the training on this.
And I go back to education for life, because we must think about work as life. So this notion developed, I think, when I started work in the 80s. It became emphasized in the 90s. Work-life balance.
Yeah.
That's a lie.
Yeah.
Work is life, life is work. We must work. Yes, people ask me the same question. Are you retired?
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, I'm going to work
Yeah.
until I die, until I have no more energy.
Yeah, exactly.
But even when I have no more physical energy, I honestly pray my head will be working. Because I think work is essential to us literally thriving as human beings.
Yeah.
And one of the dangers, therefore, of our societies, where work has been demeaned, where jobs have been highlighted as the most important thing. So people actually talk about, they want a business card. And I shock people, even in the conference where I was, after finishing to speak, I'm like, wow, we want to be in touch with you. Could you please give us your business card? And I'm like, I actually don't have.
Yeah.
I can give you my phone.
Yeah.
I can give you my email. But it's this association of, if you're that significant, you surely must have a business card.
You've got a title.
You must have a title with you.
Position. And,
So yes, we must go
yeah.
back to answering the question, why? And that why will also change how we even perceive the formal education we have received. Our formal education needs to be treated for what it deserves, not much. Currently, not much. Go through the motions and go through it quickly. But seriously, can we find ways in which formal education today responds to the challenges of work, therefore the challenges of life? And I think that's what we're faced up with.
It is an attitude, this attitude that, well, I'm doing this because this is all I could get, but really I want to do something different. And so people are spending a lot of their lives missing out on opportunity to actually do self-improvement in whatever they're doing. I was down at the hospital, IHK, yesterday, and chatting to the girls on the front desk. And when the patients come in, they register, get the insurance card, find the identity, find the records, do all that sort of stuff. And it's actually one of the most challenging jobs.
Yes.
And it's also, you're dealing with Joe public.
Yeah.
So, and you're dealing with people who are emotionally fraught because they're sick or their relatives are fraught, that sort of thing. And so I said, how's it going? And they were saying, well, tell me it's busy sometimes and other times. And I said, you realise this is one of the most difficult jobs that you could do. And if you can do this job, you'll be set for doing anything else as you progress. And if they get that, they will really progress. And then they can move up internally and stuff. But a lot of people don't get it. Oh, I hate this job. Oh, I'm supposed to be doing this and I'm doing that. Yeah, well, But so that means that the person marks time, and they never progress. I actually know of another girl who she got it. She had great difficulty getting a job. She got a job. Her boss was harassing her a bit and putting her under pressure and so on. So she left. Did she leave for another job? No, she didn't. She left to do nothing. And now I don't know what she does, but to me she's just completely wasting her. She's a girl in her 20s.
So I guess I would like to find ways in which, because this formal education we have it. Personally, I'm now thinking, David, for your generation, for us who are policymakers, for us who looking back now.
Sages.
I think we need to be able to now say, okay, we have this formal education, it's with us. How do we make it work in ways in which it produces people who work, not people who are looking for jobs? And how does formal education build passion? depth of conviction. And I can refer to my two kids, and they are totally amazing. Grace was for the longest of time, she's a doctor.
Grace is a doctor.
Is a doctor. Was for the longest time wondering why this doctor thing. Because the amount of reading, the amount of routine, the amount of, what else do you call it? And
there's a lot of kind of cramming knowledge.
And you call it memory, you know, all that.
Yeah.
But she says the thing that persuaded her is she had made application for the medicine. She spent her between A level and university. She actually went and spent it among the Somali community in Garissa in northeast of Kenya. When she came back, she was a different person. She was more passionate, and she was very clear. She was going to devote her time and life more to public health, less to clinical. She was going to devote her life in the rural rather than in the urban, and so on. Joshua, whose interest was law, one of the most formative things now I have seen was spending a stint as an intern in the court in the, I think Arusha, I forget what it was called, the court in Arusha for genocide, that was trying genociders of Rwanda. And let me tell you, just being there, listening to what was happening, I am not surprised that Joshua today is an international lawyer. He has passion for it. He goes for it. So I think that the way in which the day, the kids' day is happening, I know a school now that has decided that swimming is not going to be extracurricular. Swimming is going to be part of the curriculum. So you remember this idea of extracurricular. And I think the idea of they are part of the curriculum. So my daughter, you know, she's doing a job that relates to saving people because drowning is a crisis in the country. And she's arguing, actually, we would have dealt with it if in every school swimming is learned. Because one of the reasons people drown is because, so let's study our environments. Let's integrate life into the school system. And I think that is doable. I think that we therefore need to be able to find ways in which we stop certain things that we are training people for. And that's the hard work, I think. I think it's possible still to now transform what is today and make it actually work for the life that as Ugandans we have.
I have a question for you, since you're not so far removed from having been, you know, studying yourself when you're doing medicine. I have now from this season of my life, and looking back, I'm saying, but why do people not read around their subject and read more broadly? Because lawyers will read the law, medical students will read medicine, but you know there's an awful lot more. And I think it's particularly if somebody goes to Harvard or some of those schools, they'll be thrown a hell of a lot of books. You know, they have to read all this stuff. But in Uganda, people just don't read. Do you have any insights into that as why your fellow, I mean, I know it doesn't apply to you because I know you are widely read, but why people don't read? Is it a lack of books or what is it?
Ian, I would even say it's not just your generation. I see people in whatever professional side they are in, including pastors, religious leaders, this area of mine, you know, I see teachers. Why can't they read beyond? I said to these bishops and pastors, why is the Bible the only book you're reading? And you read other books, for goodness sake. Read other books about how people are living their lives. So I think the question is asking is pertinent. Do you have a sense why that is the case?
So I think it's hard for me to answer for other people, but I'll answer why I think I read. I grew up in a very religious family, and we used to read the Bible every evening together like this in the sitting room. And this answer is on retrospection. And my parents' version of reading the Bible was it's not reading a verse, it's not reading a chapter, you're reading a book. So if it's the book of Mark, we are reading the book.
That's amazing.
And one of the things that made it valuable for me is that you had to explain what you've learned.
Right.
Or what you so that went on until we got into boarding. So the reading culture was there. So when people, I've gotten this answer because people keep asking me, why do you like books? Why do you like books? So I grew up reading the Bible like that.
So you had to read the Bible and explain it?
Yes, because everyone had to get the chance right from when you can speak and everyone is around. Like we said, we are reading the book of Mark, we're now in chapter 3, and then maybe someone reads the scripture and then it's like, okay, we go around in versions. What did you learn? And then what did you learn? And everyone's, even when we were kids, our views were valid. Like you could tell your dad, like, yeah, I think this guy is talking about this and he's talking about this. So I grew up with this thing that reading is helping you to understand. And then,
well, even though it was just the Bible.
It was just the Bible. And then at some point, I read a big book that was not the Bible. That turned my life's meaning, like my perspective upside down. Origin of Consciousness, Julian James. So you can imagine someone who has grown up reading the Bible and Christian literature, and then you read a book that says that all this stuff was written by human beings because their brains were breaking down. So
but
I started inquiring.
But you find you another book, I think, at this stage.
Did you not read like Jane Austen or some classics, Charles Dickens?
Yeah. I then got into reading those those novels and what, and I wanted to be a bookworm. I loved the Penguin series. I became a library prefect. I just loved reading, but what I'm saying is that I think what makes me good at reading is I learned the purpose of reading. Like for me, it's a way of figuring out the world. I got into doing docu-series and I had to read about the power of stories, the power of speaking. I had to, like, it. For me, it's that if you want to figure out something, get a book. But to answer your question, why we don't read, I think also goes back to the reason we read. We are taught to read. We spend most of our reading in school to answer exams.
Just
learning.
Yeah,
so it's like you have this
textbook.
textbook.
Yeah.
Actually, we don't even read the textbook. We read the
Lecture
teacher's notes, and then we read the past papers, and then we go and answer and get the grades. And that went on for me as a top student. I knew how to read well. I could read lots of stuff. So I naturally did well in school. So, and then up to A level, I was like, but I read Julian Jane's book in my senior 5. What is it? Yeah, you can imagine, man. But before that, I'd read a book by Paul Freire, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and on. But
when
after
did you read Pedagogy?
Senior 4.
That is amazing. You know when I read it? My goodness, I was doing my master's.
Anyway, so I grew up in this family where I was exposed to these big books. My parents only read the Bible up to date. It's just of late that
Is your father a pastor? What is this?
No, he was a civil servant. He was a politician, but he reads it like.
Yeah, but I think it's amazing for me what you said. Reading wasn't about answering questions set. It was about facing the questions of life.
Yeah.
And making sense of the world, making sense of anything. You had a purpose to reading, you know. And I think what else you say that coheres, that really makes sense together with what Ian was talking about. The fact that at the very beginning, when your mind is inquisitive, you're being told to read the Bible differently. Exactly. You are even being told to make sense of that text. You are not being told there is a particular meaning that you must assign to the text. You're being told you are free to assign meaning to it. And it seems to me that even when it's the same book you're reading, why you are reading it really actually matters. Exactly. If you're reading, so I really think, but also the timing, you know, when the brain is still capable.
You see, there's also, I do come back to issue of learning the basics, because being able to read a book, a lot of people who have had a good education, they're not able to read a book. You know, they don't read well, they stumble over it and stuff like that. So therefore, to me, learning to read a book fluently and fairly quickly, and I remember when I was a kid, I was a slow reader. I remember reading Tolstoy and reading these things, you know, and, you know, it took me ages to read some of these big books. And I don't think it was a different culture. I was brought up in. But I then learned. I then got in and I read some popular fiction, stuff like Leon Uris and these popular sort of books that people take on holidays with them. And and it was later on that I pretty much don't read much fiction now, although my wife reads good literature. I say good, there's a lot of good novels and good fiction. But we have the ability to read. You have the ability to read. But you talk, a lot of people your age, David, and they literally can't get through a book because they haven't the mechanic, they haven't the, it's like typing. I learned to type on a computer. Some people never learn it and they do this one finger typing because they never sat down and learned the basics. And I think that if Indians learn mathematics, that's why they're very good at that. And I think that there's something about also learning the basics which allows you then to build on, which there's something bad going on at the minute when people don't have the basics. You get people with degrees, people very smart, and they can't read. They can read, but
not in the literal sense of reading.
No, so, and the basics, Ian, connects with even how to read. How do you read any text for that matter? It happens in the home. It happens in the class. It's what's happening. It's what ought to happen in life. At that stage of life when you are actually building foundations, but it's not happening now. Anyway.
So we have to summarize today, and so I think we've talked about the purpose of education and linked it to work, which is very great, and also I think this will be very important for parents and maybe people who are already in the system. But your closing remarks, I want you to make mention of recommendations or actionable things that people can do so that they get into the sweat or the work. It's a broad question, but a literal a summary of like a compass towards work. Let's use that, a summary towards work, a compass towards work.
I mean, I suppose I would say that no matter what work someone is in, what job they're in, there's always opportunities to use that for self-improvement. And that usually, I heard someone talking, I think it was in the BBC today, about, they give their 10-year-old son a talk, and this guy said, always volunteer for everything. And actually he had a point, because if you keep, when you're volunteering, you're taking an opportunity, and you're saying, well, let me try that, let me do that, I'll help you with this, I'll do that. And so I think that it's when you're passive and you're like, this is just a job, something better is coming along, So I think that's the taking the opportunities for self-improvement. I remember having a conversation with some of my nurses, and I said to this girl, so how was the day? And she said, oh, it was quiet, it was a good day. And I said, so why was it good? She said, because we didn't have much to do. And I said, but was that not boring? I said, no, we were just here seated. And I was like, but to me that would be boring because nothing's happening. You're just sitting there. And I think that some people have this idea that somehow if you're just sitting there, that's good. But it's not. Because you're not developing. There's nothing, So this whole sort of sense of passion, the sense of developing yourself, the sense of learning new skills, the sense of lifelong learning, it comes with that active mindset, that whatever I'm in, there's probably something I can gain out of this situation. So
I think two things. One is beware of laziness that comes out of this system of education. What you just described is the direct result of this education. Actually, it's training lazy people. People who have no interest in being stimulated. So that's number one. I think beware of laziness. Number two, I think there's a parent listening to us, watching us chat. If you're a younger person, listening to this podcast, if you are, whatever stage you're at in life, that question, why? So what? Why? How does this add value to me? how does this add value to society? How does this add value to my relationships? How does this add value? The question why must be answered. And I think to stop and ask that question is important. I think parents need to stop and ask the question, why are we taking our kids through this system? I think parents have really the hard work to make choices. And I'm really hoping that certain schools will collapse as a result of this kind of thing. No, seriously, because they are doing more damage. They are doing much more damage to us. I mean, these schools that literally are churning out, fours and fours and fours and fours. But the kids can hardly have not slept. They don't know anything that they can do. So I really think that parents need to ask, why are we taking our young kids at the moment when their minds are awake to be stimulated? Why are we killing their
development?
minds?
I think the word is to develop critical thinking. We need to be producing kids who actually have that faculty.
Creative thinking.
Creative thinking, but critical thinking.
Creative,
Why?
critical.
Yeah.
Why? Thank you.
Wow.
Critical.
Thank you so much. This has been very great. And what I love the most about this is we've not mentioned money. That is because education and work has been narrowed down to that. I think we shall have to have another conversation around this. And
people listening and watching might think those guys are not talking about money because they have it. So please save us.
No, but that's why I think we shall have another conversation.
Yes, about money.
But linking it to this. So I think whoever is watching, I hope this, like every other episode of ours, has gotten you to ask questions about your education, about your work, and I hope that you will go forward to try to answer these questions. And for the young people listening out there, I hope it gives you the courage to do things differently. My take on education is that one has to recognize that it's a sinking ship and know that I'm in a failed system. Yes, I have to stick throughout.
Formal education.
Yeah, formal education, sorry. Yeah, school. If you're in school, if you're in university, or if you're in secondary school, or even if you've graduated, you should just acknowledge that I am deficit of what is required from education because of this. And you should just know that there is something missing and then find a way of incorporating it into your life to learn. And I think what Ian mentioned, that reading books teaches you, I think reading books is one of the ways out of this. Because when you read books, you get the courage to go and do something, to go and knock on a door, to go and try something. I met Ian because I was interested in making a docu-series to get people to open their eyes, and that's why I'm here. And I think if we get more people reading difficult books, we shall be on a...
So tell our audience too, we will talk about the impact of scrolling and social media.
Definitely.
Because that too has a huge impact.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Yeah.
over to you. Thank you very much.